And we're starting the new session, Kushame. Kushame, to repeat it each time, is a local Gibraltarian expression to say escúchame, which means listen to me. So what's better than a concept like this to listen to Mr. Barak Weiss, that we have the honor to welcome today, together with Ruth Fisher, who's going to help me to interview him. So Barak, welcome. Let's begin again with you now. The first thing I would like to hear about you, if you don't mind, because it's very dear to your heart and you communicate it fantastically. It's not just music, but I will always remember all my life the walks we made in Jerusalem, and you took the time to show me a few things. Can you tell us, and we have the privilege to have a proper Yerushalmi, you are an incarnation of who is someone who was born there and had a lot of family roots there as well. Do you mind to take us through the streets of Jerusalem verbally?
Well, I'm not sure. Well, hi everyone. So nice to have you here. Thank you, Jan and Ruth, for hosting me. Well, I'm not sure how to summarize this complex city that you can either love or hate, and usually both at the same time. It has its own personality, Jerusalem, and I'm feeling attached to it. I mean, even when I lived outside of Israel, what I missed most was not Israel, but the markets in Jerusalem, for example.
You took me to an avenue, if I remember, and it was named Weiss, and it's linked to your family, if I understood.
Well, yeah, I have a square named after my father and a street named after my grandfather. They came from Hungary. Hi, Aniko. They came from Hungary, from Budapest and Debrecen. And my grandfather was a chief rabbi of a Jewish congregation over there. It's called the Neolog. And after the Holocaust, I have a cat here that is giving me like a backup. So after the Holocaust, they came to Israel. They settled down in Jerusalem, and then they lived there all their lives until and apparently the municipality, the officials thought that what they did deserved to have a name at the streets and after their names. Well,
so next one is yours, hopefully.
Hopefully not.
I just realized, maybe you know her. Do you know Fleur Hassan's Naum or Fleur Naum? She's at the town hall of Jerusalem. She's from Gibraltar, actually. She's the daughter of the previous chief minister of Gibraltar. So maybe we could lobby a bit for the next street Vice. It is possible.
Sure.
So do you mind? It's not very common to have a background which is not necessarily in music originally. You went through law and marketing and finance. Would you say a few words about this and how you evolve yourself and how you came to music in general and how that serves you really?
Well, I went to law school, to Jerusalem University Law School. It takes quite a lot of years to get to finish law school and be admitted to the bar, etc. And after that, while working as a lawyer, I did my MBA in marketing and finance. So that's for a young man, it takes a lot of its time. I mean, the time of adulthood. So when I was 30, when I realized that I really enjoy working as a lawyer, as a business lawyer, but I really hate my life, basically. It took me some time to decide to stop all my dreams and all the the path I went through since after the army, basically, after my army service, and stopped doing that. And it took, and after, and of course, you know, the friends, the environment didn't see it, didn't understand what I'm doing, because come on, I had a career going on for me. Took me a while, and then I in a very strange way, I found myself as a reporter for an e-paper, a reporter of jazz and world music, etc. Because I was a fan of the music, and from that, in a very crooked way, I became the artistic director of the Tel Aviv Jazz Festival. So from that time on, I'm in the so-called music business. And these days, there is no business in the music business, but come on.
Can I jump in here and ask you about the jazz now? Just one question or two.
Sure.
So I met you through our love of jazz, and I know that there's a really vibrant jazz scene in Israel, which we'll touch upon a bit later. But I wanted to know when did you first get into jazz, and what was it that appealed to you about that genre of music?
Well, I didn't listen to jazz till I was basically in the army. It's not what people used to listen to in my family or in the neighborhood. And there was a concert of Ray Charles Orchestra, actually, in Jerusalem. And I didn't know Ray Charles, but I came for the opening act, was Ricky Lee Jones, which I really loved at that time. Also love her today. And the opening act was bad. But the horn section of Ray Charles was amazing, and I was blown away. And I think that's how I started listening to jazz.
Right. And as we said, that there's a vibrant jazz scene in Israel. How would you describe Israeli jazz?
Israeli jazz, the scene, or is there like Israeli jazz?
The style of music, the way the music comes together.
So obviously, Israeli jazz is very American in its space. It's not European it's not European, but on the base and the basics of American jazz, you add Middle Eastern Arab music and Israeli folk songs, and the music that each and every one of the musicians remembers hearing when he was a kid at his grandparents' house, from whatever diaspora they came. So if you add all this together onto the basics of American jazz, you can get what we call Israeli jazz these days.
Right. Jan?
Yes, I would like to just come back a bit before jazz, because I think we're going to spend much more time on jazz, and it's the passion around this Zoom room, I would say. You know better than many people how was the construction of the music in Israel itself. When do you mind to tell us a few words about this? I mean, it started very European, and it constructed all these Zionist songs at the beginning, and we are very far from this today. Do you mind to take us through this construction?
Well, I don't know where to start. I'll start at the beginning of Zionism, basically. The early Zionists came from Russia, from Poland, and they brought their own music with them. But so the music was basically Russian in style, but they tried to be more local. So they tried to get some elements of Palestinian Bedouin elements into the music, but it was very Russian. What we call now is very folk music from the early 20s, 30s of the last century. Is basically Russian-based music, like Russian folk. And then came in the 50s and the early 60s. It was there was a lot of French influence in Israel, so you get all the chansons and all that music into our music. And of course, in the 80s, then start capitalism, and so rock that was in that it was in the 60s and 70s. We got that in the 70s and 80s, and jazz started at that time as well in Israel, like really meaningful. So whether you like it or not, capitalism. Do you see my cat?
Yes.
Okay, this is Nika. So part of capitalism was the start of jazz in Israel. Now, starting from the 80s, late 70s, early 80s, the music of the unheard music in the radios, etc., the music of the immigrants from Muslim and Arab countries started infiltrating into the mainstream media a little by little. So there were basically two music scenes, like the mainstream music scene, which was very, very we call Israeli, but it was very old Israeli, folk Israeli, and the underground music that comes from Muslim and Arab countries.
The Mizrahi sound.
True.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you said that jazz started in sort of in the 80s, or the emergence of jazz started in the 80s. And you yourself, though, became the artistic director of the Tel Aviv Jazz Festival only in 2016. 2006, you're right. So it is also considered to be one of the most important jazz festivals in Tel Aviv, in Israel. And I want to know, what did you want to bring to the festival when you first started it? And have you been able to keep to these principles over the years? Or have you found that, say, in the 80s, people were very excited by the start of jazz coming into the country, and they just wanted to hear anything new. And as the years have gone by, so we just keep hearing the same sort of the standards or the commercial sound, because that's what's going to get bums on seats.
Well, when I started listening to music, I grew up. There were two main festivals in Israel, still are: the Red Sea Jazz Festival that used to be in the summer, and the Tel Aviv Jazz Festival in the winter. And initially, both of them started in the late 80s, about 30-something years ago. Initially, the jazz in Israel was very, very was very American, not original. I mean, Israeli bands in the 80s and the early 90s basically just played American standards,
Songbook,
great American songbook, tried to be as American as possible. Only in the 90s, there were a few things that really shook the world of what we called Israeli jazz. In '92, there were three young jazz musicians who went to New York and succeeded in doing very quickly Avishai Cohen, bass player, became like part of the Chicorea trio, and Omer Avital, another bass player, became like one of the a key figure in the New York jazz scene. So in Israel, there was a shift, because right now we had role models that you can do it everywhere, and there were other events, but many musicians from that on changed their like students changed their major from classical music into jazz, and many of the jazz students went to school at Berkeley, at the New School, etc. So there was a lot more like a transportation between back and forth from New York to Israel and back. And actually, in the middle of the 90s, after the peace process started, like the Oslo Accords, etc., people started everywhere, not just Israelis, but people started looking around and see that we're living in the Middle East. We're not living in Europe. We're not living in the States. We're living in the Middle East. So they started adopting some of the music that they hear around us, and that is part of the development of the Israeli sound. Now I see that Gila Cohen is mentioning that also the Jibri and Avishai Cohen, the trumpet player, that's true. That's what we call the second wave. After the first three major musicians who came to New York, there was a wave of an influx of musicians coming to New York as well, and they were greeted by the previous ones, and they became like a community. That's also part of what happened. When I started my tenureship at the jazz festival, it was just the beginning of what it was early on that we realized that there is an Israeli sound. Initially, we didn't think that there was an Israeli sound, but we just realized it in the early 2000s. And so I tried to incorporate that into the festival, not just American jazz, not that just American musicians, but to bring to the attention of the jazz fans, to bring to the attention that what's happening right now in Israel. That was my main goal at those early time. Later on, people really realized that now Israeli jazz is very popular in Israel, because it wasn't back then. And so my next goal was to get the Israeli audience aware of the amazing things that happens in the continent nearby in Europe, because for me in the last 50 years, the major advances in jazz happened not in the United States but in Europe.
All right. Okay. Another musician I was thinking of that also sort of paved the way in America as well was Yossi Fine, because he played with some huge musicians out there. He sort of opened up the funk area. And
Yossi Fine is now the artistic director of the Red Sea Jazz Festival. They just announced it a few weeks ago.
Wow.
And it's amazing. Yossi Fine is an amazing person.
Phenomenal. Yeah.
And he has such a vast background. It's going to be amazing. So whenever you can come to Eilat.
Yes. Oh, that's super news. That's really super news. So Another fantastic project that you founded was the International Showcase that takes place every November in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. And I attended it in 2017. That's where I first met Jan. And the rest is history, as they say. And I have to say, it was really one of the best weeks of music that I've ever attended. It was fantastic for the music. It was fantastic for the networking. So for those of you that are unaware of actually what this showcase is, can you tell us a bit about it and why you set it up and the way that you set it up? Because for me, I think that was one of the first times that I've ever been in that sort of setting, showcasing this sort of music.
So it started very, it's for me, it's a funny story how it started. It was at the jazz festival, the last day of my jazz festival in 2010, February. And the director of the Cinematheque, where we held the festival, came over to me and said, "They are angry." I said, "Who are angry?" "The Frenchmen are angry." And I didn't know what he meant. So it took me a while. And then I realized, then I found out that there was a French delegation of artistic directors of jazz festivals that came over to Israel. In the morning, they had some showcase events, and in the evening they came to my festival, but no one bothered to tell me about it. And of course, they were really they didn't feel comfortable that no one is greeting them and talking with them, etc. So of course, I rushed over, I met them, and everything was cool and fine. But the next day, the next day after the festival ended, I called my colleague at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs at the culture department and told him, "Listen, we need to do an Israeli showcase and to do it properly." And Ofra said, "Go ahead, do it." So at 2010, I invited on board the Yellow Submarine. It's a nonprofit to produce it. And in 2010, we did a single day of a showcase. After there was a dance, there is a dance, very good dance showcase. So we asked all the participants whether or not they want to stay another day and just come for music showcase. Some of them came. It was a nice pilot, and in 2011 we launched the full 4 days of a showcase. And what it is basically, each year for the last 10 years, my 10th year was in 2019. I'm not doing it anymore. And each year I invited colleagues of mine, people from the world music industry, artistic directors, media people, promoters, etc. Invited them from all over the world to see what we consider to be the best of Israeli jazz and Israeli world music. Hopefully, in what we hoped for and what is happening is that they'll be so amazed by the quality of the music that we have here, that they'll invite them to their festival, sign agreement, sign contracts, album contracts, etc., etc. And actually, it's working very, very good.
Yeah, I have to say there's been some bands that we saw at the showcase when I was there. Quarter to Africa is one that I can think of, and that's already being played on a national station here in the UK. So it's a great way to bring to attention artists that you might never have heard of before. So the I was going to ask though, now with this current pandemic that we seem to be going through, well, all over the world, isn't it? And the arts and culture have taken a massive hit. They don't seem to have received much help from the government. I know here in the UK that is definitely the case. I'm assuming it's the same in Israel. have you done anything in particular to help musicians during this particular period? I'm thinking along the lines of Jazz Community. That's another project that you set up a few years ago.
Yeah, a few of my friends, jazz fans, we started a jazz community. It's like a volunteered fan-based jazz community, and actually today is our anniversary because 4 years ago was our first concert. So hooray! And we're doing many things, but we are producing concerts, like international concerts, inviting international musicians that we think that are great, but people in Israel don't know them. We invited them to Israel and produce concerts, etc. Now, of course, that was all shut down. We don't know when the borders will be open up, but we are doing what we are doing. What we are doing also is doing an Israeli jazz concerts. So we had a concert planned on the International Jazz Day, and of course that was postponed with Israeli musicians. But what we did, we asked the fans who already bought tickets not to ask to reclaim to get their money back, and just to wait for the concert to be rescheduled, and most of them agreed to do that, and this way we were able to pay the musician in advance for the music, and that was, I don't know how much it helped, but it was like a solidarity act. We also paid the club, the concert hall we rented. We paid them in advance because they are with us in the same boat. So the jazz clubs that we rented, they needed our help, so that's what we did. And during the lockdown, we started. We asked the community what will they need, and to help them during lockdown. And from the feedback we received, we started we call it a listening party. Every day during lockdown, we open up a WhatsApp group, and every day a member of the community selected an album, and we all listened to it together, chatted, etc. And we didn't feel alone. And for me, it was very powerful, very empowering. And I hope and believe that it was something that other members of the community thought it was good.
Right.
Barak, this is in Hebrew, correct?
What? Hebrew? Yeah, everything is in Hebrew.
There's no chance to see that in English, no? One day. To make it a bigger community even.
Maybe in the future. Right now, I'm dedicating this my work to the Israeli fans. That I think that's what I feel more close to. But maybe in the future. I mean, I really believe that that the future of part of the future of music in general, jazz in particular, it will come through communities. People don't, not everyone, but I feel that people need the feeling of community, especially in this strange period of time that we have with governments that they're not helping us in any way. We're not feeling very part of a community, a big community. So we need these kinds of communities, and jazz is also about getting people together, not just jazz actually, but this is what I'm passionate about.
I was going to say exactly the same. I mean, around this Zoom, I mean, I see people from Spain, Israel, and UK, and Gibraltar, and the rest. I mean, we are in fact in demand of a larger community with bridges. You know, you speak about jazz in Israel, and although we are all together, it's already a form of a community, and people come back. We actually want you there, you know, as opening this community, if it's possible. And looking forward, of course, you have this background of law and finance and marketing, and you coached artists, and you are on different festivals. Um, I'm going to ask them the same thing in the form of a question. What are the bridges outside of Israel you think we could do to, because we all frustrated of the same stories, government not giving the priority there, which we understand, health comes first, but what is the famous better world we want after COVID without culture, obviously. How does it work in Israel today? There are protests, correct? Are you aware of how the country reacts to the risk of shutdown of culture?
I think that's a personal point of view, okay?
It's about you today.
I think most of the people are oblivious, doesn't really care about the lack of culture and art these days. The art scene and the culture scene was the last to open up, and only yesterday they gave us the green light to start doing live concerts. Of course, smaller one with a lot of restrictions. That's obvious. That's acceptable. Starting June 21st, we were the last to receive it. Even you could do weddings, you can do bar mitzvahs, and etc. And of course, you can go to synagogues. But it was not allowed to do a live music concert or to go to the theater. And it's not because they try to. There were talks among us to say that they're doing it because many of the people in the art and culture communities are coming from the left side, and that's why they left us to the end. I don't believe that. I think we just don't have the right lobby for it. No one took notice of us until we started demonstrating. And yesterday was the first time that the bar minister agreed to meet with a delegation of the music scene, the music world in Israel. And it was a surprise, not a surprise, but they decided to open up next week.
It's interesting you say this, because I think also the same situation is in England. I think the general public have a serious lack of awareness of just how important culture and arts is, and exactly how much money, for example, in England, that it brings into the country. I mean, if you think of all the theatres that are in Shaftesbury Avenue, for example, it brings in a huge amount of money, and yet people seem to think the arts, and I still can't get my head around this, that the arts and music is something that it's a passion, but it's a hobby. It's not a real career. And I'm wondering how we can ever get past this attitude of general people, let alone the governments, but your general public as well. Do you have any thoughts on that, or is that just too big a question?
You can do a dissertation on that.
Yeah. True.
I think it will change once the mindset of the artist will change. Once the artists will understand that what they are doing is business, and they'll treat what their passion, not just as a passion, not just as their hobby, but they'll see it as their business, and and people will see this, because what I see many of the artists today, someone are really feel uncomfortable to talk about money, to talk about budget, to talk about finance, because it's art. And I think it gets across, and people are feeling that it's like a hobby. Why don't you get a proper job if you can sing? Because these days you can do it. You can ask the same question to pilots, for example, to air pilot, to to pilots on airplanes and etc. And so I think it starts within the artist. I don't like putting blame on society, etc. First of all, is what we consider to be ourselves, how we project ourselves to others. Then everything that happens on that after that.
Yeah, indeed, we can talk about culture in general as the biggest contributor to GDP in France. We can talk about the initiative of New Zealand currently, which put 154 million, if I remember, for culture. Germany, 50 billion. But I think where I totally relate is, wait a minute, it has to come from the artist as well, and the shift of mind and how they're going to treat their own business, in fact. It's not easy for every artist, and that will probably cut a lot on the way, but it's probably the combination of two and these famous communities that you mentioned. I am adamant to say we should bridge our communities and make it even bigger, but we're not going to change the world now. We passed already 30 minutes by far, and we're supposed to stay in this format. And there are questions coming. We will let others ask questions. Very, very briefly, when we are from the outside and we look at Israel, people speak about high tech, and then they speak about cuisine, the new Israeli cuisine, and how successful it is in all the big cities of the world, in London, in Paris, and elsewhere. I have this dream of this Ottolenghi of the jazz, or the construction of Israeli music, the Ottolenghi book, maybe the Weiss book. Do you think I can convince you to write this construction one day, or I'm too provocative at this stage?
It all has to do with in advance, Forgetting, no, I mean, it's in my plans right now. We all try to basically to survive and think about the future and about bringing money to the table and doing what we like. I would like to think that one of these days I will be able to find time to sit down and write about history of jazz. For me, it's about jazz. It's about the history of jazz in Israel. It's about what's jazz in Israel in general. And I don't know, share my thoughts.
Well, count on us, obviously. If you don't mind, we're going to open the questions. Jose Luis, who's behind the scene, can unmute everyone, in fact. And Gil, you had a question about open air concerts.
Oh, right, yeah. So, hi, very, very good interviews. Thanks, Barak. So, I mean, a problem here in the UK, even though, lockdown's not as lifted as it is in Israel, is the arts community, especially jazz musicians who day to day make their, what we call the bread and butter on gigs. In Israel, lockdown's been relatively successful. But because the weather's better there than it is here, and we have unpredictability here in terms of doing open air concerts, is there plans to take advantage of this good weather? And are you able to have sort of larger physical space concerts that utilize the good weather and the distance to be able to sort of bring music back into people's lives in a live sense, offline?
It's like everything in Israel. It's complicated.
Barak,
Usually,
can I answer that?
Sure, Amir, go ahead.
My pleasure. Hi, I can answer that. Look, a few venues in Israel actually expanded the business and opened up like the backyard. So they got the approvals from the municipality. This happens in Haifa. Just today, I spoke to the owner of the biggest club owner in Haifa, and with the help of the municipality, they understand there's difficulties. So many of the venues open up to the outside. Again, Israel, it's very comfortable, at least most of the time of the year. So we have open venues. and a few closed venues actually opened up a capsule. That means instead of going face front the stage, they're going circular. That means like 4 capsules, 4 positions around the stage. So they're turning a normal venue to a 360 degrees venue in order to expand the capacity of people that can join around, because the law says that you have to keep a spacing between one and another. So we do that, and we do open venues, like extended closed venues that are now open venues. Going to happen in Be'er Sheva. It's happening now in Haifa, and maybe also in Jerusalem. Let's see. Well,
that's fantastic.
Yeah,
that's fantastic. Thanks, Amir. So if I can just ask a little more question of Barak, because you were talking about, seeing as you were talking about someone making the case. So that could be you in this instance. Whilst everyone else is having to lock down, Israel's been rather successful in its lockdown and is opening up, and you're able to take advantage of the summer and the night and the open spaces. The creativity can actually probably expand in a way that it can't in other countries. Is that an opportunity for you to make to the government?
It's an opportunity, and we definitely try to make it happen. There is quite a lot of bureaucracy in Israel, you may be aware of. So every little shift of what used to be needs to get permits, and municipalities and government are not very lenient about changing the permits, even though it's a special occasion. So we try to do that. Many of us right now. It depends on the goodwill of specific municipalities.
Okay. Thank you. Cheers.
Any other question? So if we don't have more questions, Ruth, we already 15 minutes more than the normal format of the Kushame session. I would like to thank you all. I can see, thank you Amir, thank you Araceli, I can see, thank you Gil, and I hope you will, and Daphna and everyone else. Sorry if I don't mention anyone. Ruth Fisher, thank you for helping us to interview Mr. Barak Weiss, who gave us the honor to spend time with us, answer the questions. Thank you so much. And I hope this is just the beginning of many, many other things together with you, together with all of us. Bye-bye. Next week, same time, same place, with the same diversity of audience. We are going to interview Daphna Levy, a jazz singer. Why not? What do you think?
Perfect. More jazz.
More jazz. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Thanks, Barak.
Bye-bye.